we're going to take a look at where stem cell therapy is right now in the near future. I'm going to make an analogy with cell phones, where technology has come in the last several years with cell phones has been right in line the way stem cell therapy has gone. And we're going to share with you where it's at right now and how far it's advanced and what we're using to help people with. So before we begin, I got a couple things I just want to get out there right off the bat. Number one, those things are stem cell therapy is legal in the United States. There's a lot of people still hung up on the George W. Bush era when the rhetoric was pushed that stem cell therapy was coming from aborted fetal tissue and coming from embryos. And the reality is that some of that stuff may have been used for research, but it was never actually legally used here in the United States. It's never been about aborted fetal tissue. It's always been, well, I'm going to share with you where it's been. Where it's at today is donated perinatal tissue. So mom and baby, the baby's born, mom's consented to donate her tissue to science. Baby's off living their best life, and then there are labs that are taking this stuff and making it available for our use, and that's what we're using to help so many people. So here's the FDA's stance on this. Back pre-COVID, there was this big timeline that we were all facing. It was supposed to be November 2020. They were going to come out and they were going to lay the law down on stem cell therapy. And if you were on this side of the fence, you were okay. If you're on this side of the fence, you were going to go away. Well, COVID delayed that. And that didn't actually come out until, I think, May of 21, I believe, where they said, okay, everybody on this side of the fence has got to stop. So we see all these companies go away because they weren't playing nice. Okay? And then you see all these companies that were on this side of the fence. The FDA basically came out and said, okay, you guys do your thing, but don't make any promises. Watch what you say in your marketing. Don't promise you're going to cure anything. And for the love of everything holy, don't put this stuff in people's eyeballs. Right? Because there were literally people that were getting stem cell injections in their eyeballs and going blind. And of course, the media lashes onto that stuff and goes nuts. But the FDA's stance right now is just watch what you're saying. Go ahead and use it. And oh, by the way, we're understaffed just like everybody else. And the pharmaceutical companies are actually providing our financial backing. So we're going to use our resources to look at drugs. You guys just do your thing over here. Okay? And I actually think that the whole COVID stuff knocked us back a few years as far as like getting an official FDA approval, being able to use this with insurance, etc. We took a couple steps back because of COVID. But as of right now, there's as long as we follow certain rules, the FDA leaves us alone and lets us do our thing. And that's why when we talk about stem cell therapy, I'm very, very clear about, hey, what's at risk, right? There's the risk. The biggest risk is it's financial, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, right? Other than that, we're not seeing any risk factors. So this all started with this guy. This is my dad. He passed away about a year ago, but in early 2018, he was scheduled to have both of his knees replaced. And finally, after several years in my career of him begging to make lifestyle changes, begging to do something different, he finally listened on the stem cell thing. And he was actually the first patient that we injected. And like a lot of our patients, like what happens with a lot of patients, he actually felt better walking off the table. He never had to have his knees replaced. So it bought him about 4.5 solid years of not having to be down for 6 months while he recovers from these surgeries. He was out riding his bike. In fact, my mom will tell you over and over again, she tells everybody, the summer before they died, they were doing like 85-mile bike rides. Not on this bike, it was on an e-bike, just to be clear. But like super active. I've got pictures, I've got video of him like doing yard work, pushing a wheelbarrow, all on knees that were supposed to be replaced. But it never had to happen. That's a win. Okay? I want to keep it short tonight. I've only got 10 slides. That's the only story that I'm going to tell. If you want to see the other stories, go to my social media, go to my YouTube. They're there. Look at my reviews. This stuff is helping a lot of people. I know you can attest to that. But I just don't want to spend a whole lot of time. Other than this, One recent one, I did a recent interview with a guy that tore part of his Achilles tendon, and he was supposed to be in a boot all summer, and that didn't happen. So he did one of these ultra marathon, like these 50-mile like trail run things in July when he was supposed to be he's still in a boot. But we made that so that didn't have to happen. And I tell you that because on my way here tonight, I about ran him over on the way out of my neighborhood because he was running by. And it made me laugh. Well, not that I ran him over, but just seeing him was like, oh yeah, that's a story that needs to be told. I interviewed him recently, so that interview's actually on the YouTube page. So, just a brief history. This guy, Dr. A.J. Friedenstein, he's a Russian scientist that discovered what they call mesenchymal or mesenchymal, depending on where you're educated, stem cells. He discovered these guys in 1976. And he described them as these blank slate cells that basically your body uses to repair itself. The purpose of a stem cell is they're going to show up at the site of an injury. And what the thought process is that they'll actually, because they're blank slate, they're undifferentiated cells, that they were going to become whatever that damaged tissue is. So we call them a mesenchymal stem cell. What's fascinating is that decades later, he comes back and goes, wait a minute, I messed up. We shouldn't be calling these mesenchymal stem cells. We should be calling these mesenchymal signaling cells. And he redacted a lot of his research because of that change in thinking. And that's really important to understand when we start talking about what we're doing today. So what he was saying at that point was, these stem cells, they don't show up and just magically become cartilage in your knee. They show up and they release these signaling molecules that tell your body to produce more cartilage in your knee. What's really fascinating is they'll even donate their mitochondria to dying cells, which is how the cells make energy. Cells dying, gets a new powerhouse, and all of a sudden the plant's back online, and what does the cell do? It heals. I think that's awesome. Okay, so his work is pretty fascinating. He was Russian. He died in the late 90s, but it's kind of fun to go back and see some of the work that he did. So, how does stem cell therapy work? We're able to isolate stem cells, and we're going to talk about where they're isolated from here shortly, or we can isolate their signaling molecules, and you literally take them and inject them into an arthritic joint. In some cases, IV. We'll talk about that a little bit more off camera. But when your knees start to hurt or your joints start to hurt, what's the usual course of action? You go to the doctor. Doc, my knee hurts. What does the doctor do? Okay, well, let's take an x-ray. The x-ray comes back and it looks like this. Joint space is toast. You got all these extra things popping out here called bone spurs. This knee, whoops. Hey, we're going way too far back. This knee's got a lot of junk in that articular space. And the doctor will say, you've got arthritis. And then they'll prescribe an anti-inflammatory. When they give you an anti-inflammatory, they'll say, when this stops working, let me know. Some of the good doctors will actually send you off to therapy to hold that off a little bit longer. But when those medications stop working, then what's the next step? Exactly. It's to replace the joint. So they'll literally come in and cut out some of that articular where the joints articulate, and they'll replace it with titanium. They'll give you new knees, right? Which works for a lot of people. But if there's a step that we could take where we could avoid that, then I think we need to look into that step. Here's the problem. Stem cell therapy is a disruptor in that system. Right, so oftentimes you'll go into a doctor and say, well, what about stem cell therapy? What does the doctor say? Snake oil. You're wasting your money. You're wasting your time. You just need to do this. Why do they say that? Lack of education. They don't understand, or they haven't looked for themselves the mountains of research that's gone on behind the scenes for this stuff. Both anecdotally from offices like ours, and actual white paper research that's there on PubMed. There's some fun reading that'll put you right to sleep on that one. The research is there. Okay, but here's the problem. If people follow what we tell them to do, and just using our office as an example, when we inject these joints, our success rate is somewhere around 85%. So if we can save 85% of people from having to have a joint replacement, who does that hurt? Financially, who does that affect? Right?
Yeah.
Surgical companies, drug companies, etc. Hey, I'm not talking about the guys in the trenches. I've got the utmost respect for the orthopedic surgeons and the guys that are doing this, guys and gals that are doing this every day. But pharmaceutical companies don't want that to happen. Okay? And it's gotten to the point where in 2019, someone got a hold of Google and said, you guys need to knock this off. You cannot advertise regenerative medicine on Google since 2019. Makes you go like this, right? So if we can take a joint that looks like this and we can inject it, and all of a sudden there's signal molecules in there to tell your body to start reproducing more cartilage, what happens? You get a reduction in pain, you get increased range of motion, that tissue starts growing back, and all of a sudden you got better function. And most of the time that happens with one injection. It's pretty cool. Okay? So, let's look at some more history. 2007-ish. This is what cell phones looked like in 2007. Hey, I remember before 2007, I was in chiropractic school, and we go get new phones, and they sent us home one flip phone, one like Nokia, a little Nokia, right? And I'm like, cool, I got a flip phone. And then my now ex-wife was like, nope, I want the flip phone. Anyway, I shouldn't tell that story. It was funny. Hey, but this was the technology in 2007. It was pretty cool. You could text, you could kind of text with this phone, but you could take pictures, you could make phone calls. Pretty neat. Okay? Well, in 2007, what was happening in the regenerative medicine space was they were taking stem cells from your own body. So they would literally drill into your hip bone, they would take your bone marrow, and they would isolate your own stem cells from your own tissue. I think that's freaking cool. Then they would take those stem cells and they'd re-inject them back into a joint, and guess what would happen? Reduce pain, okay, cartilage growth, better range of motion, better flexibility. Okay? But the issue is this. The issue is age. Anytime you take stem cells from your own body, it's going to decrease your chances of your work. Let me rephrase that. The more gray hair you have, the less likely it is going to work for you. Ignacio, I don't mean to look at you when I say that.
Yeah, okay.
Hey.
I'm done.
But I tell you, the older you get, the less likely it's going to work, because our bodies aren't designed to be here forever. Biologically, we are set up to degenerate and to die at some point. Otherwise, the world's overpopulated, blah, blah, blah. You see where I'm going with that. Okay, so great therapy, helped a lot of people. It's still being done today. And I will tell you that it's about twice as expensive as the things that we're doing here. It's not as effective, but it does help people. Okay. Next up was around 2013. Around 2013, we were introduced to the iPhone 5S. Remember the ads? How can we forget them, right? They're shoved down our throat all the time.
Hey.
So now, instead of just making phone calls, now we can surf the internet. Now we can actually send videos and pictures back and forth from like grandkids, children, etc. And that's cool technology. Right? And I think that's the one that actually had like the fingerprint thing that you could like use your fingerprint for security. Okay? This was awesome. Well, in 2013, this is a cross-section of an umbilical cord. This is when we actually started using perinatal tissue. So we were isolating stem cells and stem cell product from the umbilical cord, from the placenta, from the amniotic fluid. And we were using that to inject into these joints. Okay, so we still had a stem cell response, but it was coming from the youngest source available to man. So I've literally seen people in their 90s take these stem cells and improve their function. Again, mom's off happy and healthy, living their life, but we can use that product into an arthritic knee to make, and I keep saying knee because I go back to that, really any articular joint. But we can use that product to help the body create more tissue. So now all of a sudden age isn't a factor. So I have people coming in their 80s saying, I'm too old, and I say, no. Now, is an 80-year-old going to get as good of a response as a 50-year-old? No. But could it still help them? The big answer is maybe. Okay? So, fast forward to today. Here we are, 2023. Now we have is it the 14, Mitch? Is that what yours is? So now we have the iPhone 14. Right? So Mitch showed us this on a hike where it was like image stabilization. So he's like, look at this. And he's walking along, and the camera is actually like positioning itself so you have this ultra like smooth video, plus all those other features. It was cool. So where we are today is with regenerative medicine, is instead of the stem cell itself, now we're using what's called the stem cell derived biologics. Okay, so these stem cells are actually secreting millions of these what they would call extracellular vesicles. So the stem cell will show up at the site of an injury, and it's going to release these little packets. These little packets contain messenger RNA. They contain growth factors. They contain cytokines. They contain all these things that the stem cell would have secreted anyway. But now we can go to an acellular product, which isn't as vulnerable to an immune system response. It's smaller, so it can get into smaller places. It's immune privileged, plus it's more effective. So all of a sudden, we're getting what would have taken 4, 5, 6 cc's of stem cells. Now we're doing it with 1 or 2. So it's driven the price down. It's made it more effective, made it more concentrated. Okay, so I would let me preface this. Joe Rogan's foul-mouthed. Brigham Bueller is foul-mouthed. This podcast is rated R pretty quickly. But this episode 1873, you need to check it out. Okay, so Brigham he used to be a pharmaceutical rep. So he spends the first hour basically going off on the BS that the pharmaceutical companies are pulling on us. Okay, it's not about our health, it's about their bottom line. But then they get into the stem cell world and talk about stem cells. And the product that Brigham is talking about to Joe Rogan is the exact same product that we use. I've always tried to stay up afloat with what's best, what's next. I've never used products from labs that I haven't been to and I don't trust. But if you want to hear someone else talk about it besides me, listen to this podcast. Okay, so that's where we are in 2023. Those are the products that we're using. Again, it's a simple, for joints, it's a simple just articular injection. With younger people, we use it with your own PRP. With older people, we actually double the dose of this stuff because we want that youngest, freshest stuff available. So there are alternatives to regenerative medicine. There are other simpler things that you can do that may take a little bit more time. They may cost a little bit less. And some of those things include platelet-rich plasma. I got a guy that's 40 right now. He is a marathon runner. He's trying to qualify for the Boston Marathon. His ankle is jacked, for lack of a better term. So he's still young enough that we actually used his own plasma from his blood. So we took his blood out, we spun it down, the plasma was left on top, we injected that plasma into his joint, and all of a sudden he's doing a whole lot better. Okay? Again, this is a product that's coming from you, which means you're limited by your age, but it is an alternative. We have amniotic fluid injections. This is just purified amniotic fluid. Again, this is something you can use if you're a little bit older, but it's not quite as effective as the stem cell-derived biologics. It is a little bit cheaper, but not by much. I have a lot of people asking me about the stem wave device. There's someone that advertises a lot for stem wave, also known as shockwave therapy. I've used this in the past. There is good research behind it. I wasn't all that impressed with the results, if I can say it that way. And then lastly, we use low-level laser therapy a lot on people that come in. They want a different option. Low-level laser therapy is something we can use and say, okay, if this works, great. If it doesn't, then we need to do the injection. So there are tons of options. That's why I say the last step is to actually make an appointment with us so we can just sit down and we can look at what your history looks like. What are you hoping to accomplish? We can look at imaging. We can talk about what your options look like, and then we can talk about cost and financing then when we know what we're dealing with. So that's Stem Cell Therapy 2023. Y'all know how to get a hold of me. Folks online, if you have questions, please ask them below. I'll do my best to answer them. And if you're ready to sit down with us, just reach out and we'll get going.